Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Berkley, and I'm an Associate Professor in Music Education at the University of Reading. This is a recording of the workshop that I presented at the BERA 2025 conference called Working Together, Co-creating Close to Practice Research Projects with Participants in Educational Settings. Because it was a workshop, the workshop was longer than this presentation is going to be. So if you're following along and you'd like to engage with the activities, I'll indicate when there are places where you might like to press press pause on the recording and have a go at the activities yourself. So what we did in this presentation was to explore ways that researchers could work together with research participants to create close to practice research in educational settings. A lot of people do co-created research, and so this workshop was a practical way of walking through different activities that you could do to engage your participants at all stages of the research process. We tried out some arts-based education research methods which promote reflexive practice in research, so to investigate identity, values and motivations amongst your research respondents. We walk through some practical steps in co-planning research projects based on your good idea. And if you're following this recording, as I said, there are points at which I would suggest you press pause so you can work out your good idea. And I illustrated my talk with some examples from Universal Voices Soundscape Peer Mentoring. Universal Voices is a children's choir that I run at the University of Reading with a student volunteer team. Here are some of the students in the picture. And this last year, 24-25, was the first year of a peer mentoring program that I co-created with the students. So I'm using that as my example. First, what we did was a clapping practice game, which I'm not going to try and play with you now because it needs a live group of people. This is a really great icebreaker at the beginning of any kind of session. It works with any number of people. And the first game you play is you simply stand at the front and you say to people, can you clap at the same time as me? So you clap, people clap at the same time as you. And you develop that game by sometimes you pretend to clap like that. And sometimes you might clap and deliberately move your hands around. You can then develop the game a bit further by simply clapping and looking at somebody, and then they pass the clap around the room. And you can go in one direction, you can go in another direction, and you can also get people to send the clap in different sorts of directions. So this is a game where someone just catches the eye of somebody, claps, and then catches the eye of somebody else and sends it back again. You can develop the game further by sometimes sending one clap or maybe two, as you wish. I have known students develop this, and sometimes they make different kind of hand gestures depending on what they want to do. And a further development, if you wish, is you can use a blocking idea. So let's say somebody sends a clap to me, I can block it, and this works like a mirror, and it goes straight back to the person that sent it to me. So this is just a nice non-verbal embodied quick classroom game that you can play to get people to get used to each other, and it's a really good pre-discussion activity to warm up the room a bit. So first we talked about what close to practice research is. So close to practice research applies critical thinking to evidence drawn from practice to address questions and problems for educational practitioners. There is a really good BERA report about close to practice research. I have a reference at the end, which I would strongly recommend as a piece of reading. So it's framed in social constructivist model of learning. Research participants in close to practice research construct their knowledge about their own professional practice through hands-on exploration and critical evaluation, rather than cooperating to a given set of rules or ideas. Co-creating close to practice research with practitioners integrates the experiences and the actions and the opinions of the research participants at the heart of the knowledge generation of the research itself. What people do is part of the knowledge generation. It's collaborative inquiry, and this approach to research creates humanizing and dialogic spaces, encouraging participants to develop critical thinking around their own professional practices. Engaging in these epistemic practices of focused inquiry, directed observation and guided practice promotes integrity and trustworthiness in the professional understanding of participants and makes them more and more open to the idea of researching their own practice and listening to the views and comments of other researchers. Giving ownership to research participants in a close to practice research project shapes the research design and methodologies, and it challenges the researcher to consider the value placed on the humans in human science research in educational settings. Effective co-creative research foregrounds the voices of the participants in all the stages of the process and enriches the participants' knowledge of the research process as well as the lived experience of the actual project. It really does make the research stick. The self-study of professional practice by pre-service undergraduate teachers in the case study I'm showing is advancing them as accomplished practitioner researchers committed to their own professional growth through critical review of their own practice. Co-created close to practice research is also a rich experience for the researcher who undertakes a multiplicity of roles. They manage the research project, agreeing the shared goals and working practices. They keep an eye on the logistics of the program of research. They communicate key concepts and ideas from the wider literature to the participants, and they facilitate research methods and data analysis training for the participants. The reflexive nature of co-created research prompts the researcher also to become an observer in their own research process and allows them to develop the professional courage to articulate and reposition their work in response to the shared examination of the research data. I pointed out that in the case study that I'm presenting, I am the researcher in this project, and I'm also the director of the children's choir that we are investigating. I'm also one of the lead tutor for the main modules that the students take where they learn the skills that they're using with the children, and I'm their academic tutor. So I'm swapping between different roles. And the research is as much about how I have taught them music as it is about their own pedagogies. So participants in the workshop at BERA were invited to explore how they might integrate this conceptualization of research and being a researcher into their own scholarship. So let's talk about arts-based education research. I am one of the SIG conveners of the Arts-Based Education Research SIG, and it was useful for people to understand what arts-based education research was. Some colleagues in the room were very experienced at using this, other colleagues were new. So to take you through it, if you've not met it before, arts-based education research is research that uses any kind of art practice in its design, its delivery, analysis, or dissemination. People asked, how much arts-based research do you have to use, and do you have to use it all the way through your research project? The simple answer is you can do what you like in your research project. And I find it useful to think of it in terms of the kind of saturation of the project. Do you want to have arts-based education research throughout the whole process, or do you simply want to use it at various different points? A lot of people will use arts-based education research in the data collection part of things. So they might use arts activities to encourage their respondents to in the data collection. Fewer people tend to use it for analysis. So the AB part of arts education research is research where researchers, participants and audiences work together using any kind of art medium, style or form to examine research questions and ideas as creative expression. And the working together part is very important. The E part, education part, research is research that's got a strong educational dimension. So focusing on learning and teaching in different formal and community settings. It might be in school or out school. It could be with children or adults of any age in any kind of subject focus or community learning. So we're investigating knowledge making in education as a subject and also as an activity. And the R part, the research, is this is a co-creative process of research, focusing on what is learnt and how learning unfolds as a result of the research. A bit more. So the arts-based bit can be any of these types of arts-based activities. So we can draw on visual arts, film, movement and drama and dance, music, creative writing in all its different forms. So all these different creative practices to explore human experience, actions, identities. And because we're focusing on the humans, we particularly find ourselves investigating questions of equity, diversity and inclusion in the broadest sense, as well as their specific application to different educational settings. So the E part is we're making a research space for creative, critical, socially engaged inquiry. This research is, by its nature, inclusive, participatory, and culturally responsive. And we're always investigating the knowledge making in teaching and learning and education. One finds oneself always investigating what kind of knowledge, what kind of learning is being communicated in the way that education is being communicated. And we particularly find ourselves investigating whether we're to what extent we are communicating the dominant cultural views and whether we think that's a good idea or not. So the research part of it, again, is focusing on the process and the participation. So this does challenge the rigid boundaries that there are between researcher, subject and audience. Researchers using arts-based education research often find themselves in a multiplicity of different roles, as a researcher, as a teacher, as a participant in the research itself, and as an artist in any form. And it does invite some new ways of thinking about knowledge and representation and engagement in education research. So this is the point, the first practical exercise for people who are in the workshop. So I invited people to think of what their good idea was. Some colleagues had research that they were working on already at various stages of completion. Other colleagues were setting up with some new ideas. So at this point, you might want to press pause, give yourself 5 or 10 minutes or so. And I suggest you draw a graphic or a picture of your good idea for your research. You might like to take a sun shape or a light bulb with ideas radiating out from it, or you might decide to draw a map of your context. So with your map, the reason I picked this map here is because it's a busy map. There's a lot going on. So you might want to think about the topography of your context. Are there sort of smooth, flat places? Are there kind of more difficult, hilly places? Are there rivers that divide up the land? Do you need bridges over the rivers? Is there a shoreline? Is it a clean shoreline, or is it a sort of fjord or delta shoreline where your context merges into other contexts? Do you need to build some roads and some bridges and ways that can link and divide the different parts of the context? Are there parts of the context that are heavily populated? Do you need some buildings and transport and infrastructure? Or you might like to draw something else. So the first part of this workshop was where participants drew the context. Now, let me talk about my good idea. So, Universal Voices Children's Choir. So, Universal Voices is a children's choir for children, Key Stage 2 kids, age 7 to 11, school years 3 to 6, that I started at the University of Reading, 2017. And to put it simply, I started this choir so my students who are training as music teachers could learn to run a choir by running a choir. I've always taught students conducting. And because this is a very useful set of skills for every music teacher to have, and it sits at the cross section of some really useful musicianship and analysis skills that students need, and also teaches them a vocabulary of vocal direction, so the way you wave your hands around, in order to be able to teach children to sing and communicate emotion through music in gesture and singing. And I started the children's choir so that students could practice their conducting on children. It's been a tremendously popular and successful project. It's really good fun. So the students volunteer. So every year I recruit a team of students. Some students volunteer for a little bit. Other students volunteer for several years, for longer. And the students come along and assist with project management, so the practical business of running the choir. They help out at events. This picture here of the elephant skull is the Cole Museum of Zoology that we have on our White Knights campus at Reading, where we took the kids for a trip to investigate the museum because we're singing songs about the natural world, particularly flora and fauna. And there were some student volunteers from the Department of Zoology who took the kids around. They had a good time. So we sing lots of events. So we take events like this and community activities at the university. We also perform in concerts regularly. So students learn conducting, and when they feel brave, they get up and have a go at conducting with the children. So they learn, through practical experience with the children, which is always the most important thing. Now, there's always been a peer mentoring program because the students teach musicianship. So musicianship, we teach solfa musicianship, which is the system of hand signs that go do, re, mi, so, la, so, mi, re, do. So there's a whole pedagogy around that. And the students team teach the musicianship classes. So there's always been an informal peer mentoring that's gone on. But last year, the academic year just finished, so 24-25, we started a more formal peer mentoring program with some students who stepped forward to be lead mentors for other students. Now, coming in, the second good idea that we had was back in May 2024, the Music Teachers Association had their conference at a school in Reading. And we went to attend, and we took the children along and gave some demonstration sessions as how we teach musicianship, and also how the choir is a teacher training choir. And the Music Teachers Association generously gave the student volunteers a chance to attend the rest of the conference. And we attended a session by Adam Ockleford, who is a very important researcher in the world of special needs and music. And Adam was presenting his Sounds of Intent framework, which is the result of many years of detailed research, which gives a framework for learning for special educational needs and disability children and young people from early years to early adulthood at all levels of impairment and ability, with any child or young person who is described as having SEND. And this was a great inspiration to one of our students who herself identifies as having special needs. And she came to see me and said, I'd like to teach the children the way I wish I had been taught myself. And she said, and you know, I think there's a lot in that Sounds of Intent framework about the sensory movement-based learning that we could put into our musicianship teaching. I'll say at this point that in the children's choir, there's about 35, 40 kids, and only one child is actually identified as having special needs. We asked the parents to tell us this. But we think, our guess is that we see a number, we think about a third of the children are demonstrating some characteristics of SEN. And so we have been thinking a lot about how to teach them in an inclusive way, and a way that particularly encourages movement and sensory learning and non-verbal forms of musical engagement, rather than musicianship work that is too literacy focused. We're driving towards the children becoming literate in music, but we'd like to do it in a rather more sensory way, rather than just driving straight to the kind of frankly quite dull way of teaching music in that fashion. Anyway, so the lead student I accepted this idea. I thought it was a really great idea. She formed a steering group of other students. So there were 3 of them as a steering group. I joined that as the principal investigator and the director of the choir. And I have another staff member who comes along and volunteers with the choir. And they also offered to be part of the steering group as an extra person. I got some funding from the university for a co-created research project, and I used the funding to pay this steering group of students to direct the program. And they got working on sorting out some inclusive pedagogies, and we got some other funding to buy various resources, bean bags, scarves, boom whackers, all that sort of material to teach with. And I suggested that we had a peer mentoring program, and we worked out a way of engaging in that. So that was our good idea. Now, with this slide, we were talking about how every piece of training that you do on how to run a research project, every book you read, tells you that you work in this order. And it suggests that it is a simple and straightforward process that you just go through. And on the surface, this is very beguiling, because this looks like a complicated project, like a piece of research you just start at the beginning and you chew your way through to the end. In reality, though, it doesn't work like that. I'm a teaching intensive academic, so research is something I would say is a sort of 20%, 25% of my time I spend on research. And I have never found that a research project has ever worked quite as smoothly as this. It goes round and round in circles. So what I suggested to colleagues is that you want to, when you're co-creating research, it's a much more complicated process. So you want to interrogate your good idea through an iterative, critical reflection process with the co-creators of the research. The co-creators of the research need to be engaged in all of the stages. Let me just click back one step here. So they need to be engaged in all of these different boxes here, and that takes a lot of time. So the thinking at each stage needs a lot of time and a lot of discussion amongst all the research co-creators. And you give plenty of time by thinking. And I find personally it's useful to think in lots of different ways. So think by doing, think by talking, by making, engaging in movement, practical exploration of ideas. Most of the pedagogy training that we did was us kind of role playing like children and trying out different games and activities with the manipulatives like the bean bags and the scarves and the hoops and so on. That's where we kind of shared our ideas by thinking and doing. So as many creative and practical group activities you can come up with, I think, is best with your co-creators. Give plenty of time for the critical reflection on the emerging shared understandings of the knowledge generation at all stages of the project. My role in the Soundscape project was to be the recorder of ideas and keep saying, it sounds like we're thinking this. Is this what we think we're thinking? And to give people the time to kind of look at the ideas and sort of chew over them. Give plenty of time to the pilot study phase to test ideas and establish communication protocols. We started our project in September last year, September 2024. And in my initial sketching out of the program, I thought we would be at the first focus group by the end of December, but the end of the autumn term, but in December. And then we could do another focus group at the end of the spring term in March. And then we could do another focus group sort of April, May time towards the end of the year. It didn't work like that at all. The pilot study took until at least February to get everything sorted out. So I didn't get as many focus group interviews as I had anticipated, but it meant that we had sorted things out. We had established our communication protocols. Our emerging understanding of what we thought was knowledge in our programs worked much better than it did. It also meant that I was able to kind of navigate some rocks in the river that cropped up during the project. So what I'd say is be prepared in co-creative research, be prepared to go back, and I put all the R words in I could find. So to review and revise, reimagine, rework, restart, refine your research, and document that as part of the knowledge generation of the methodology. So a piece of research can comment on the methodology. So as you publish your research, as you disseminate your research, you can always I think it's as useful to talk about the methodology, how you did your research, as it is to talk about what you particularly did. So I would recommend also documenting the process. So in order to actually write down what it was that you did, or of course, you don't need to write it down. Perhaps you might want to draw it or dance it or do some creative writing around it. So at this point, we had another pause for some practical work for participants. And again, this is a moment where you could press pause on this recording if you wanted to do this. So we were thinking about the people in the project. So our question is, going back to your good idea for your research, who is who and who does what in your project? So I asked participants to think about how they wanted to share the working practices throughout the project with the research participants. And I encouraged people to draw pictures, and we borrowed from Wali art, which uses these simple geometric shapes like triangles and circles and lines to draw pictures and animals, buildings, and other objects. The advantage of this is it's quick to draw. You can do it fast. So you can, as your ideas come, you can quickly do it fast. Some participants decided to do a new picture. Other participants took the previous picture and populated it with people. And I asked people to think about, how will your participants talk to each other in the project, and how will they talk to each other at the different stages of the project, and who is in charge, and does this ever change? So if we look at the picture on the bottom right-hand corner, we might decide that the figures who are playing the drums are in charge, or we might decide that the figures who are dancing are in charge. But what we see are two distinct groups of figures there. If we look at the picture on the top left-hand side, we've got a lot of people all together in the spiral. And what we're interested is, it's harder to understand whether the person in the middle, who appears to be playing an instrument like a horn, are they the center of the circle? Are they directing the circle? Are they being surrounded by the other people in the circle? So when the people who appear to be kind of joined together holding hands in the spiral, are they working together as a team? The other question I asked people was, do your people need anything else to help them talk to each other during the project? So like in both pictures, do they need buildings or tools or food or plants or any other kind of infrastructure or assistance to help them talk to each other and work together as co-creators in the project? So it was at this point, people took some time to draw their pictures. In the discussions, we different colleagues talked about to what extent they had thought about where the power structures lie in the work that they do. And this led me on to talking about rocks in the road back in the Soundscape project. So here are the parameters in which I have to work. I think every project that deals with human beings will come across some rocks in the road, because human beings are human beings. We're not dealing with kind of laboratory conditions where we can control as many variables as possible. What makes education such an interesting subject is that we're dealing with real people, and close to practice research, we're dealing with real people in real schools and classrooms and community settings. So life happens. So in my project, the students are volunteering and they can leave at any time. Some students volunteer for a few weeks, for a term. Other students might volunteer for longer. Students go in and out on school placement as well. I never ask them to come to the children's choir while they're on placement. Many of them can't, because they are located far away, and so they can't actually get to campus. So I have to allow for the fact that students can leave at any time. Now, there's some delicate ethics to navigate in my project around establishing this partnership learning community amongst the students. Now, they're very familiar with working as professionals in their on their program. Most of the students are on our BA primary education program. They're on a QTS, qualified teacher status program, and they're training as teachers. They are trained in professionalism from the outset. They have a module every year called professional studies. So they understand professional behavior very profoundly. But we needed to work in this context of this volunteer project to make sure that there was inclusivity for all the participants. We had to have some students in charge, but we also needed to balance those power relationships and to navigate how to give reward and recognition to everybody in the team, because I wanted to make sure that it was fine for somebody to volunteer for a couple of weeks and feel valued and wanted and recognized and rewarded, as well as somebody who might volunteer for 3 years. So all those contributions were equally valuable. So it was easy to collect the ethics forms and the consent forms, but I'm their academic tutor. So, of course, there are issues of power. So I explored this and discussed this in the ethics form that I got approved by our Research Ethics Committee. I also discussed this with the students openly and gave them several opportunities to consider their participation in the program. I didn't want to create a situation where they felt obliged to be involved or just kind of like bulldozed into doing it because everybody else was doing it. So I think I'm confident in saying that students were able to give informed consent about that. Now, we did have some arguments amongst the team. I'm not going to whitewash that at all. So there were some difficulties navigating the friendships amongst the teams, the sort of just friendly social relationships there were, versus more professional relationships as peer mentors and mentees. I did get some kind of unhappy comments and a few complaints from some students about other students, particularly on that sort of borderline of somebody who's a friend suddenly becoming in charge. And it took some while to organise that. I will say that my staff colleague, was extremely helpful in being an extra person in the room to help kind of navigate those conversations. I found that very useful because otherwise, as the academic tutor and the director of the choir and the investigator, the main research lead in this project, it would have just got far too introspective with the particular students if it had just been us in the room. Having my colleague in the room, who was not the researcher and not the director and not the academic tutor, but simply another helpful person, did really help to make those discussions balanced and much more kind of reasonable. So we did have to have some really honest, courageous conversations to sort out the clashes and determine next steps. I tried as hard as I could to give the students the opportunity to speak their mind. We used the technique of sleeping on it a couple of times. So we'd have a meeting maybe today, and we might have some contentious discussions, and I gave people the opportunity to take a day or two to come back and give me their responses later. And I'll also say that the placement schedule, because all our students are out on placement at some point during the academic year, this drove the need for the mentees to have to learn to teach very quickly. So they get mentored by their mentor, and then they knew that they had a hard deadline by which time they had to actually start teaching on their own, because their mentor would go out on placement and they'd have to do it. So this did also determine the data collection dates. And I do think in close to practice research, these kind of pragmatic realities are what often governs the research. But that's the whole point of close to practice research. It's close to practice. So we then had a further discussion amongst colleagues about how they would train their participants to be researchers. And we investigated what they thought their particular participants would need to know and understand and be able to do for data collection, analysis, and dissemination. Different people had different expectations as to how much they wanted their co-creators to be involved in those different aspects of the research. And what I suggested to people was to look back at the pictures and see if they suggested anything to you, and to annotate your picture or draw more marks and images and thoughts to see if you could identify areas where you thought research training should take place. So to give you a flavour of what we did last year in 24-25, we started off with some student team training. The plant funding is the funding for co-created projects that University of Reading made available to us. So we had some musicianship pedagogy training, because that's what the students are learning to teach. And the 3 student leads for the Soundscape project led alongside me with that training. And we allocated, we have 4 musicianship classes. So there was me and each student lead for each of those musicianship classes. I used the GROW model. So goal, reality, options, and will as a mentor training for the students. I chose that because I've used it before and I find it useful, and I wanted a straightforward acronym for students to be able to remember. We talked a lot about magic questions. We role played those different questions. We played games with a talking stick and a listening stick. So when people had to actually sit and listen and not interrupt, which is a very useful thing. We talked a lot about the value of listening, and also what it's like to have to give your class to somebody else. And we agreed a schedule for the shared planning of the teaching, because the students are team teaching, so they needed to agree a schedule per week for getting ready for the weekly musicianship teaching that they were going to be engaged with, and also when the video reviews would take place. So the students got going with their weekly musicianship teaching from September through to June. We had a protocol for the shared planning, which we shared on Teams, and a protocol for self-review post lessons. So we did video review of joint teaching in November, February, and April. I'm a fan of video review for teaching. I think it's a very useful thing. I think it's very valuable for both the person doing the teaching and the person doing the mentee and the mentor to be able to watch the videos side by side. It makes it much more dialogic and egalitarian. I particularly don't like the thing where you go and watch somebody teach and then you tell them what they did and they can't remember what they did. I think that's kind of useless. So I think videos are much more useful. I encourage the students to use the magic questions from the GROW model of mentoring to kind of inspire what they had to say. And this also provided some unity to the questioning that the students were engaged with. So, as I said before, the pilot study took quite a long time to get going. So the focus group interviews were in April and May. And this is where I asked the students to talk in musicianship class groups to reflect on the first year of the project, to talk about their experience of being a mentor and also being a mentee. And I used object review as a prompt for discussion, and I'll give you a little sample of that in a moment. And then just as we get going now, I'm talking to you on September the 12th. So a week after next, we're going to get cracking with next year's training. And so the students who are mentees in year one students who are mentees in 24-25 will lead now as mentors in 25-26 and pass their knowledge on to other students. I'm going to use the Wiley pictures, the little triangle people, as an exercise for those new mentors to determine how they will engage in their relationships, what they learned from before, and what kind of mentor do they want to be. And again, we'll agree a schedule for our planning and our peer review. Now, here's an example of the arts-based education research that I used in the focus group meetings that I held with students. This is unprocessed data, so I'm not presenting it for academic review, but I'm simply showing you what kind of things people investigated. So I asked students to bring along an object or an item that's been significant for them when they were teaching musicianship. I asked them to talk about it, and I asked them also to tell me how this made music happen for them. And you have here some quotes. And it's interesting to see, I always find this with arts-based education research, particularly with things like object, when you ask people to bring an object with them, is they'll answer the question you ask them, but they'll also answer a whole load of other questions that you haven't asked them as well. So going from the top left-hand corner, this first one here is a pictogram, a progress map. And this student particularly wanted to talk about the progress that she felt she'd made with her teaching team, her other students, and how this had impacted on the student. Top of the middle, this is a screenshot of a Spotify playlist, and this student wanted to talk about how important he thought bringing his own love of the music that he used to listen to and how this enriched him as a music teacher. Top right hand corner, this is a shaky egg. This is a little egg shaker that we use for teaching the students. It's a very tactile object. And this student was reporting how she'd never come across this in her own teaching. She'd had a very verbal, literate way. She had been taught music in a very verbal, literate way. She'd never done movement-based work as a child in music, and she understood music theory in the abstract, but didn't understand it in an embodied way. And she was very inspired by using the shaky egg. As she said, I just thought it was the coolest thing, that this was a really quick, easy, and very obvious way of encouraging children to really kind of embody rhythm and really understand it. Bottom left-hand corner here, you've got an articulated fidget toy. And this student said that they thought that the fidget toy demonstrated how teaching can be messy and it can be smooth, but that's just normal. That's what teaching is like. And talked about being a mentor and just kind of bending the teaching into the right direction. The next picture you see there is a little laminated egg. one thing the students decided they wanted to do was to get the children to do a formative assessment every week. So they made a poster where the children could put their little name tags against I found it easy, I found it difficult, I found it something else. So the children could actually identify how easy or difficult they felt the learning went for them each day. And the students decided to do that too. So this student here is talking about how that process of formative assessment every week made him really think about what did happen in my teaching and then how is that going to impact on the next part of my teaching. And the final picture here on the bottom right hand corner is of a student and some friends singing. And she talked about how important the voice is to her, how fundamental her voice is to her, and how much kind of physical pleasure she gets from singing in harmony, and how she wants to bring that to her teaching. So it's interesting to see when I ask people to bring an object, we get pictures, we get objects, we get some teaching objects, we get an abstraction, the progress picture. So we get some made and some found objects from students, and they talk about their identity as music teachers, their emerging musical knowledge in different kinds of ways. I also talked about how I wanted to include some arts-based education research ideas in the dissemination of the project. So we're going to disseminate what we've done in 24-25, and we're using it as well to plan 25-26. So the co-creating students wanted to ensure the sustainability of this project in the longer term. They're keen to make a training model that will help future students, and they also want their ideas to be disseminated and through the way that we teach initial teacher education in music. So the current ideas that we're working on is students are planning to create some podcasts where hopefully we're going to put that we'll be able to get an episode with the Music Teachers Association podcast. This is a sort of a more widely available podcast than one that we would produce ourselves. Students are busy making Instagram videos of SEN spotlights, and they are creating these and directing themselves using their own footage that they have recorded themselves and then edited themselves. So this is a kind of video essay, video diary that they're making of their own work and speaking of their own understandings of special needs in music and how they engage with this in their own pedagogy. We'll see if I can get us a session at a teaching and learning exchange for staff and PGR students at the University of Reading. And I am planning to turn this work about co-creating research into an authored article. Hopefully we'll get a Bera blog post. I think that would be a useful thing. And our university offers a WordPress site for research as well. So we're also going to make ourselves a Soundscape WordPress site, which I'm going to invite the students to engage with and make contributions to so that their voices are particularly heard there. I'll just give a plug for Universal Voices Children's Choir. If you're keen on social media, then do join us. If you're in the Reading area and you have children or you know children who might be interested in joining us, then scan that QR code and come along. You're also very welcome to come and visit us and see what we do at Reading. So if you're interested at all in choral education, you can see the choir in action. But also if you're interested in teacher education, practical learning of students and this co-created work, you're very, very welcome to come and visit us. So I'll just pause here to give you the references for this work here. I would particularly point out the final reference here by Wise et al., which is the Bera Close to Practice Research Project Research Report. I found that one very helpful indeed in establishing my understanding of close to practice research, and I've drawn on the theoretical understandings of that in this project here. So I hope that my talk has been helpful to you. Thank you very much indeed for coming along, and feel free to contact me if you have any more questions.